Good evening. I love being back in this room. We have enough new residents that I'm going to act like this is our very first Speaker's Corner.
But it's not.
It's almost 8 months ago that we started Speaker's Corner right here. So we've been gone, but we're back. I'm Kit Cassingham, and this is Speaker's Corner.
Yay!
Gill Cross, our speaker tonight, has a couple of fans in the room, I can tell. Now, I don't think anybody knows who you are. Oh well. Gill, as you'll discover when she starts speaking, is from London.
Wait, what? England.
I know.
Really? Didn't know.
Well, she hadn't started speaking yet. She has had several careers through her few years in life, and the topics I'm hoping she'll cover in future Speakers' Corners. But the career that relates to tonight's talk is that she was a teacher of literature. She holds a Bachelor of Arts in English and a Master of Arts in Victorian Literature, Art, History, and Politics. So with that, let's welcome Gill Cross to speak about Oscar Wilde, an Irish legend.
Thank you, Kit. Just checking that everybody can hear in the back.
Yeah.
Okay, so I do come from London, and one of the greatest chortles I've had on this ship is how many of you Americans can't tell the difference between Australians and New Zealanders and South Africans and British people, because to us, we can tell the difference really quite easily. So the fact of the matter is, I am a London lady, and I tend to move quite fast, and I tend to speak quite quickly. So what I will try to do is to slow down my speech so that you can actually hear some of the things I'm saying, and then also the vocab. Now, this amazing fellow, this amazingly dapper fellow, is Oscar O'Flaherty Wills Wilde, and he took Victorian Britain by storm because he is a witty man and he's a clever man. But he had a life that was very troubled, and he had a life where he ended up having a terrible downfall. So most of the talk today is going to be focused on Wilde and his trials and tribulations. But I also want to give you a flavour of what was happening in Victorian Britain at this time. So Queen Victoria, you may or may not know, ascended the throne in 1837. She had a 63-year reign, and she died in 1901. So an enormous reign, and during that time, Britain was a very, very powerful place. And I'm still staggered when I look at how tiny our island is, at how much power Britain had. And there was a great deal of change that happened then, and a great deal of social issues which affected not just Wilde, but many, many people, not just in Britain, but across the globe. So let me tell you why he is so important to me. So much as I am very, very English, my father was a Scotsman, and my mother was Irish, but she was born in London. But I was actually born in Mozambique, and I lived there until I was 3. My father was a chartered accountant, and he worked on a sugarcane plantation as the chartered accountant there. And we lived there for 3 years, and then after that we moved to Zimbabwe, and I was there until I was 10, and then we moved to the UK. And it was actually quite a traumatic experience, going from this vast, beautiful landscape of sunshine and animals and space to the UK. And we didn't move to London, we moved to a place in Buckinghamshire, which is pretty grey and overcast. So then when I was 12, I watched this film, and it is a film called The Trials of Oscar Wilde, and it stars this fellow, Peter Finch. Now, since then there have been many more films that have been made about Oscar Wilde's life, but this one is very, very close to what actually happened to him. And I watched this film, and I watched his ascension into the higher echelons of Victorian society. He became one of the most celebrated people in London. He was invited to all sorts of dinner parties. He was the person that everybody wanted to know, wanted to see. He was also a homosexual, and he had hidden that from, because of course it was illegal, and we'll go into that. And just in terms of language, I'll use the term homosexual all the way through, because actually we're talking about the legalities of male-on-male desire. So I'll use that phrase all the way through, that word all the way through. So you can see the second picture I've got, which is a bit of a rubbish old fuzzy affair. But you can see there that is when he's, one of his plays that's in a theatre, one of his plays has just been shown, he is the centre of attention. And you may notice, let's see if I can work out how to do the, oh crikey. It was all going so well, bloody hell. Right, okay, so here is Wilde, and he has there a green carnation. And so when we're talking about homosexuality at this time, it was illegal, of course, and punishable with some quite serious prison sentences. And so what men needed was a sort of safe way of showing who they were and what their interests were. And the green carnation is a symbol of homosexuality. And so what you would get is you would get men who would wear that, and then other men would know that it was a safe space to talk to them, or maybe even to begin a relationship. Wilde had a coterie of male admirers, some very, very close male friends, some of whom he was having relationships with. But at this time, he was reasonably safe in terms of the way that he was behaving. So when I watched this film, as I said, I was 12 and had found this move to the UK kind of quite problematic. And there was something about Wilde's story and something about the way that he was having such a terrible time that made me want to go and read some of his work. And a friend of mine's father had this short stories here, and it really intrigued me. So as Kit said, I got a degree in literature and then the master's, which has some Victorian literature in. When you're doing a degree in literature, you read stuff from other countries, and what you find is that different countries have different ways of writing. If you look at Russian literature, they're looking at very political things, they're looking at stasis in society, no change, concerns about that. If you read something from India, it's like a breath of something that we would never have had a part of. So they will talk about really, really rich colours, really, really rich smells, the sound of birds, the sound of the street, and there's a real vibrancy to Indian writing, very, very sensory. And so this first excerpt is from The Happy Prince, and Wilde was a real sentimentalist, and he was very much interested in making children happy in terms of making them feel safe and getting their curiosity up and running. So here is this. High above the city, on a tall column, stood the statue of the Happy Prince. He was gilded all over with thin leaves of fine gold. For eyes he had 2 bright sapphires, and a large red ruby glowed on his sword hilt. So we have that real sense of romanticisation that's coming through here in a child's story, and we also have the richness of the colour that he's talking about. So I was mesmerised when I began to read these short stories of Wilde. I really liked his depth and complexity. And then later on I went to read his first and only novel, which is The Picture of Dorian Gray. And this is very close to the opening of it. And the ideas within this really intrigued me. So he says, from the corner of the divan of Persian saddlebags on which he was lying, smoking, as was his custom, innumerable cigarettes, Lord Henry Wotton could just catch the gleam of the honey-sweet and honey-coloured blossoms of a laburnum, whose tremulous branches seemed hardly able to bear the burden of beauty so flame-like as theirs. And this is a picture of the laburnum, and you can see the beautiful, if you don't know the flowers, beautiful golden blossoms coming down, and the idea that a branch may not be able to handle the beauty of the blossom was really intriguing to me. And I love this kind of the idea of the Persian saddlebags, and everything is exotic and great. So let's have a think about Wilde as a person. Well, he was an upper class man. He was born in Dublin in 1854, and his Irishness was very important to him. And there's a tradition in Ireland of we can call it being sort of kissing the Blarney Stone, and it basically means that you speak well, you use vocabulary, you use lyrical language, and the Irish are all very, very friendly people. I know some of you Belfastians know that how the Irish behave. Wilde had this very eccentric mother, Speranza, and that wasn't her name, but she donned it as her sort of pseudonym. And she used to have a sort of salon where she had a coterie of writers and artists who would come and be with her, and she would hold court. And she was pretty eccentric, and she broke a lot of rules. And unsurprisingly, Wilde also was a rule breaker. He was a very clever young man. He learned to read very quickly. And of course, because he was a man of class, the certain class that he was in, he attended some of the best establishments for education. So one, Trinity College in Dublin, very, very famous university, and then also Magdalen College in Oxford. And I'll just let you into a bit of a British joke about Magdalen College. So Oxford and Cambridge as universities are very competitive with one another, and it's very, very difficult to get into either of those colleges, either of those universities. And if you want to apply, you have to only apply to Oxford or Cambridge. So you can apply to 5 universities in the UK, and you then get accepted by whichever. They give you an offer, or a conditional offer, or a straight acceptance. But you have to nail your colours to the mast with Oxford and Cambridge. Crikey, sorry. So Cambridge have also got a college called Magdalen. It's a slightly different spelling, but they call it Magdalen. And there is this kind of like joke that goes on, Magdalen, and who knows, who cares? So there's this kind of in-joke that goes on with these higher educationalists. Now, we're going to stray into the world of art now. So this fellow over there, John Ruskin, he was one of the greatest Victorian art critics that has ever lived, and he really did know his stuff. He captured the zeitgeist of artistic movements. He was a supporter of the Pre-Raphaelites, which we'll speak more about, and he was very much trusted by people to know what he was talking about, and to bring art of different sort of types of art to the masses. However, he married this lady, Effie Gray, and if you're interested in this at all, Effie Gray is a film, it was on Netflix a while ago, I'm not sure if it still is. And he married Effie Gray. However, he's older than her, and he put her on such a pedestal that he was unable to consummate the marriage because he thought that he would defile her purity. And so essentially she wanted children, and she wanted to have a loving relationship with her husband, and no matter what she said, she couldn't persuade him into it. So in the meantime, she met this guy here, John Everett Millais, and he was a pre-Raphaelite artist, and I'll show you some of his paintings in a tick, and I'm sure you will recognise some of them. So she met Millais, and they began to have a relationship, and the marriage with Ruskin was annulled. But I want you to keep thinking about Ruskin, because we're going to come back to him, because he had some real similarities with what was going on with Wilde, which I'll come back to. So here is Millais, and here are 2 of his paintings, the first of which is Christ in the house of his parents. And this was a really, really controversial painting, and it almost uprailed the Pre-Raphaelite movement. And the reason for that was because the people thought that the depiction of the Holy Family, so Joseph, Mary, was just too banal and too workmanlike, and that it was disrespectful to Christianity to have a setting like this. And this was so controversial that even Dickens himself weighed in on the issue and commented. But here is a really famous painting of Millais, and it is of Ophelia from Hamlet as she commits suicide. And this painting is in the Tate. Both of these paintings are in the Tate. Now, these are called the Tate Britain now. It used to just be called the Tate. But when the Tate Modern was built on the Thames, on Bankside, they then started calling this the Tate Britain. And Ophelia here is covered with lots and lots of flowers, which have all sorts of symbolic symbolism in, to talk about her purity, to talk about how she's feeling, and those kind of things. And the model for this was a woman called Lizzie Siddal. And Lizzie Siddal, it was considered to be a very poor choice to become an artist model. It was almost similar to be a dancer or a prostitute, and so she was taking quite a risk in order to do this. When Millais painted this painting, she actually lay in the bath for quite some time, and so this very lifelike, this kind of very cold attitude that she has there, and a very white and pale skin is what she did. Now, She's buried in Highgate Cemetery, and during the Victorian period there was a problem with burials. So many of our churchyards were full and we couldn't bury people. And so what happened was that many of the London boroughs got together and they did what was called the Magnificent Seven. And they built these enormous, really important cemeteries, which were really respectful, but also had lots of amazing sort of Roman architecture, Greek architecture in it, and so it was a place to be. Now, in the 90s, I was so enamoured with Highgate Cemetery that I looked into getting my own carcass in there when the time came. But they won't bury people anymore, but they will inter your ashes. But even in the 90s, that was £15,000. So crikey knows what it is these days. And as it happens, I think I just dive overboard. So Highgate Cemetery is really famous for having lots and lots of famous people there. This is Marx's tomb, Karl Marx's tomb. People come and visit him. Mrs. Beeton of the cookbook is buried in there, and lots of very, very famous people. Now this is Lizzie Siddal's grave. Now when she was being painted by Millet, she became part of the pre-Raphaelite, the men who were pre-Raphaelite painters, and there are about 4 of them. And one of them is Gabriele Dante Rossetti, and he has a sister, Christina Rossetti, who's a poet. You may have come across her. Anyway, they got married, but sadly Lizzie Siddal died when she was quite young, and Rossetti was so overcome with grief that, so he was an artist but he was also a poet, and he had some poems that had not been published, and he was so overcome with grief at the loss of his beloved wife that he put these poems into her coffin and she was buried with them. Well, a few years later, Rossetti was hard on his luck and he'd run out of money, and his publisher said to him, "You should never put those poems in that coffin, you really ought to have published them." So they did no more than go into Highgate Cemetery and dig up poor old Lizzie and found the poems which were furled within her hair. So going back to Ruskin, who was Wilde's tutor at Oxford, he also had a big row with this guy here, James Abbott McNeill Whistler, who you may know is an American artist. And they had a row about this painting here, Nocturne in Black and Gold, The Falling Rocket. And what happened was that Ruskin wrote a really damning critique of this painting. And in that critique, he questioned not just the quality of the painting, but he questioned Whistler's integrity as an artist. And Whistler was so upset about it that he took out a prosecution for libel. And I'm just going to take a moment to talk to you a bit about libel and slander in the UK. So for us, traditionally, the reputation of somebody is very, very important, and we want to protect that reputation at all costs. And there are all sorts of phrases, an Englishman's word is his bond, you know, nobody would ever welsh on a bet, any of those kind of things. Reputation is all. And so we've got 2 very strong laws, and one of them is libel, and that is a law whereby if somebody has put something in writing which damages your character or reputation, you can prosecute them for it. And then we have a law of slander, and that means somebody has said something and then you can prosecute. And it's important to know this because we're going to get on to Wilde later, and he has some libel that he's talking about. But here for Whistler, he took out a prosecution against John Ruskin, and it ended up bankrupting him. He was awarded in the end a farthing, which is no money at all, and his debts were thousands and thousands, so it bankrupted him. It ruined Ruskin's health, and it actually put so much of a strain on the British art scene at this time that it's even infamous now. People will still know about the Whistler-Ruskin thing. Now, I just want to, whilst we're here, talk about this painting here, which is a private view at the Royal Academy, 1881, by William Powell Frith. Now, this painter is a really interesting guy. He always does massive canvases, and there are 3 or 4 that are very, very important. I'm actually going to do this because that painting is too dark in this, and I want you to see. The first thing is that we have some very famous people here. So, for crikey's sake. Bloody hell. Bloody hell!
Bloody hell! Bloody hell!
Okay, so this is Wilde himself. This is Millet, having a look here. This is the artist Millet, and this is the Prime Minister Gladstone. And you've got all of these people here looking around at the paintings. But look at the paintings. We would never have paintings like that, all close together and higgledy-piggledy. And what we can see is at this point, art is not given the reverence that we give art now. So when we go into an art gallery now, the painting is there, got lots of space around it, and you have excuse me, the ability to stop and enjoy it and focus on the artwork. But here we have all of these ones higgledy-piggledy, and there are also some that are here, and this is where the phrase below the line comes from. Something's below the line, it's where people can't see it and it's therefore unimportant. So this is again showing how important Wilde is. He is actually more central than the Prime Minister in this painting. Very, very important. He's got these acolytes who are all looking at him and want to know who he is. Or, well, they know who he is, they want to have convo with him. This is Wilde's oeuvre. So he's got some poetry in there, short stories, and then he's got his novel there. But he really becomes famous here. Lady Windermere's Fan. I can't see if I'm doing it. Lady Windermere's Fan in 1892. That's when he becomes really, really famous. The Lady Windermere's Fan is, let's just go back there. Lady Windermere's Fan is a very funny critique of contemporary society, and it hit the cinemas, and it was a sellout, and he became the toast of the town. It was really most extraordinary. So this is Wilde's only novel, The Picture of Dorian Gray. The piece that I read to you earlier about the laburnum comes from the beginning of this novel. And if you ever hear any jokes about a picture in the attic or any of that caper, it comes from this novel, because essentially Dorian Gray starts off as a very good character, but he then begins to take on all of the seedy underbelly of Victorian London, and he has a painting painted, and somehow or other he stays young and youthful. The painting is put into the attic, and it becomes more and more decrepit and evil looking, and eventually Gray becomes a murderer. And this did well, but it was published firstly in magazine form, which is typical of Victorian literature. Printing wasn't what it, printing got much more accessible later, but to be gone, lots of Dickens's, well, all Dickens's work was done in chapters, in serials, in magazines. People used to lend them to each other, and it was only later they were put into novel form. So here's Dorian Gray. And then this is where Wilde really, really came into his own. So we've got Lady Windermere's Fan, A Woman of No Importance, An Ideal Husband, and then probably his most famous, which is The Importance of Being Earnest. And many people know this one. It's the one where there is this idea of the main character is found in a handbag, and the Duchess says, "In a handbag," and then everybody laughs in the theatre about that. And then similarly, this is about men going Bunburying, and there are lots of homosexual overtones, because by this time Wilde had got very bold in terms of not being too concerned about being a homosexual in a country where it was illegal. So he has all these amusing situations, and what he's doing is he's critiquing some of the things that are going on in Victorian society. But he's critiquing it in a comic way, which is a very British thing to do. We have real traditions of satire where we have changed governments because we have actually we've ridiculed them, we've challenged them, we've championed them. So here we have him using the form of the epigram. So not to be confused with Rochefoucauld's maxims, which normally talk about a more moral issue. So an epigram would normally be quite amusing, and it will have a twist which allows the person to say what they're actually trying to say. Because British people often don't say what they're actually trying to say, because it could consider to be impolite. So he was being able to talk about contentious issues here without causing causing offence by being too straightforward. So here are some of Wilde's most famous epigrams, and many of them that you will recognise. I won't read them all to you, but the first one is quite amusing. Some calls happiness wherever they go, others whenever they go. So it's quite amusing play on words. The one down here, we are all in the gutter, but some of us are looking at the stars, is a very famous one. He also says, "I've nothing to declare but my genius." There's a one about America here. America is the only country that went from barbarism to decadence without civilization in between. So, and then the last one is one of my favourites. It's to do with the British tradition of fox hunting, and I don't know if you know too much about it. It's a real upper class sport where everybody goes out and with their velvet jackets, and they have some port, and then it's a very important thing. But they essentially go on horses with a pack of dogs to chivvy a fox out of its lair, chase it down, and then the dogs tear the fox apart. And so it's a really brutal sport, a really horrendous sport. And it's now outlawed, which is, it was outlawed a few years ago, but people are still upset about it, certain people. So he says of fox hunters, the unspeakable in full pursuit of the uneatable, and really gets to the bottom of the fact this is such a brutal and pointless sport for people, because you're not even going to eat the fox. What's the point? So anyway, so Wilde, despite being a practicing homosexual, was married to this lady, Constance Wilde, and Constance came from a good family herself. Her father was a barrister, and she was a very, very loving wife. She wasn't aware of his homosexual predilections, and so when his downfall occurred, it was a terrible, terrible shock to her, and they had 2 children, Cyril and Vivian. And Cyril and Vivian actually changed their names after Wilde was disgraced. And she supported Wilde to his death, even though things had been very difficult and he'd lied. Now, the crux of what happened to Wilde is about this guy here, Lord Alfred Douglas, known as Bosie. And he's the chap on the left, very pretty fellow, I think you'll agree. And he's still at Oxford here, and Wilde met him and fell passionately in love with him. So this guy is probably about 20 in this picture, maybe 19. Wilde is in his 30s. So we might consider no judgment really on male love, but we might consider judgment on the age difference. However, scholarship suggests that actually looking at the power dynamic of this relationship, that Bosie had more power than Wilde, and part of his power came from the fact that he was so youthful and so beautiful, and so he was able to call many of the shots. However, had he not been so alluring to Wilde, Wilde would never have ended up in the situation he was in. So, just to look at how homosexuality was viewed at this time. So from 597 Anno Domini, Christianity and homosexuality were unable to function together. However, it was considered to be sinful and not illegal. But in 1533, the Buggery Act came into force, and so male anal sex was outlawed and made punishable by death. So when I was talking to you about the consequences of male love, you could end up dying over it. And homosexual acts were considered criminal until 1967, so that's when the Homosexuality Acts were decriminalised in the UK. However, underground, we saw with the Green Carnations, and underground love and passion between men has been really normal. In the 18th and 19th centuries, you had a lot of molly houses in London, and molly houses were known for where gay men could go and meet with each other and talk about things and perhaps have relationships. We had in the 50s Around the Horn, very satirical piece, and then also the language Polari. And Polari is a language made by gay men where they change language in order to speak privately to one another. And some of it is very amusing. So here we have Wilde again with Bosie, and what you can see is this, obviously it's a photograph would be very expensive at this time, and he is not at all hiding what is going on with this relationship. You see he's got his arm around him, and then again we've got another posed portrait, so he is not hiding his love for this man. Now into the fray comes Bosie's father, and this is John Sholto Douglas, the 9th Marquis of Queensberry. And I've just at the bottom put the kind of hierarchical, aristocratic hierarchy for you. So essentially you've obviously got the sovereign, then you've got a duke, and then the marquis. So the marquis is very, very high up in terms of aristocratic lineage. Then you've got an earl, a viscount, and a baron. Now this guy was known to be a very, very violent man. He was violent to his children, he was violent to his wife, he was short-tempered, he was rude to waiters, he got banned from his club, he was a really rather unpleasant fellow. And he got wind of the relationship between Bosie and Wilde, and he was really not happy about it at all. The other thing he's really famous for is the Queensberry rules of boxing. So the idea of not hitting somebody below the belt, these come from him, the Marquis of Queensberry, and these are the Queensberry rules that he did in 1867 and are still followed now. So that's why they're called the Queensberry. Anyway, the Marquis of Queensberry made a few attempts to stop Wilde and Bosie being together, and he was particularly concerned about them being open in public. So he sent a calling card to Wilde. Of course, in Victorian Britain, the calling card is how you actually communicated, and there are many protocols about how you would and would not use a calling card. And here he says, for Oscar Wilde, and this is the actual card that he sent, for Oscar Wilde, posing sodomite. Now, it's quite amusing because he's misspelled that. What he means is posing sodomite. That's what he's accusing him of. But he made this terrible, this error in the card. Now, Wilde very stupidly decided that he was going to challenge this and sue the Marquis of Queensberry for libel. Now, the thing about libel is, I've got a slide here. So Wilde in 1895 responds with his private prosecution for defamatory libel. The thing about the Libel Act is the Marquis of Queensberry, if he's found guilty of this libel, he could go to prison. He's a rich man, he's a powerful man. So there's no way that he is going to leave this suit undefended. So it was absolutely suicidal of Wilde to do this. But the scholarship suggests through writings and through some of the accounts from friends and the court cases that actually Bosie, because his relationship with his father was so bad, Bosie was very keen for there to be a public showdown where his father was discredited. The trouble was, Wilde wasn't just sleeping with Bosie, he was also entertaining some male prostitutes at the time. And these male prostitutes often came from very poor backgrounds and were very susceptible to being blackmailed or being paid to say stuff. So the trial took place in the, so Wilde's friends tried to talk him out of it, but to no avail. He was absolutely enamoured with what Bosie wanted to do, and so he went ahead with his trial. And the trial took place at the Old Bailey, which is the most famous court in Britain. It's right in the centre of town, and all of the very high profile cases are held at the Bailey because they're given that kind of status. So all of the really bad serial killer stuff, big defamation cases, when the newspapers are taken to court, they all happen at the Bailey. I had the pleasure of actually teaching one of the judge's daughter for a few years, and he used to invite us and a group of people to go up to the Bailey and have a good look round, have some dinner with him, and actually watch some cases. So that was really good. And if you are interested in the Old Bailey, about 5 years ago they put a lot of their cases online, and so you can actually look at lots of cases. And the first time I lurked around there, I found this most bizarre case against a 14-year-old boy who was actually executed for walking up and down the Strand and saying that he was an Egyptian. So I'm not quite sure why that would have considered something you should execute somebody over, but they did. Anyway, very quickly, the Marquis of Queensberry's barrister said, look, I'm going to bring out these male prostitutes and you're done for. And so Wilde dropped the prosecution. Now, by doing so, it was found that therefore the Queensberry accusations were true in substance and fact. So Wilde's now in a very tricky situation. He's been found to have been engaging with male prostitutes. He's found to have been broken the law in terms of homosexuality. So his friends said to him, for Christ's sake, get out of England, get to France. Now, if he'd have gone to France, he would have been exiled from England for the rest of his life, but he would have actually been safe. But he chose not to do that, and he fell into this melancholy and apathy, and he didn't go. So, of course, very quickly, an arrest warrant was applied for, so offences of sodomy and gross indecency, and in April 1895 he was arrested for gross indecency. And in that very same month the trial began. So you can see how the bastions of power in Victorian Britain are coming for Wilde. He has transgressed social values, he has behaved badly, he has brought it to public attention, and now he's in some real trouble. And in this trial he was asked, what is the love that dare not speak its name? And many people think that comes from something that Wilde himself wrote, but it doesn't. It comes from a poem that Bosie wrote, and he's talking about this love that dare not speak its name. And this poem was published, so it was therefore they were able to discuss this in open court. And so this happened in April 1895, and he was convicted in May 1895. So within a month he was convicted and he was sentenced to 2 years of hard labour. Now Wilde by this time was very stressed. He ate a lot of food, he didn't really take too much care of himself, he drank quite a bit of wine, and so hard labour was really, really hard. So it's hard fare, it's hard bed, and it's hard labour, like crashing stones, taking strands out of rope and all that kind of thing. So he was sentenced first of all to prison in Wandsworth Prison. Now this is the borough of Wandsworth. These are the 32 boroughs of London. This red bit here is the 33rd one, which is the City of London. But it's considered to be 32 boroughs and the City of London. It's just the way it works. So this is where I lived, in Balham, in Wandsworth. So where Wilde went to prison was actually really quite close to where I lived, and we used to drive past it. That is Wandsworth Prison here. And then this is Clapham Junction Station, which was just 2 stops up towards Victoria on the Overground. And this is one of the busiest stations in the whole of Europe, has 17 platforms. And Wilde was taken from Wandsworth Prison to Reading Jail via Clapham Junction. And he said that it was one of the most humiliating things that had ever happened, because by this time he was in such disgrace that people were just didn't want to have anything to do with him. So he was taken onto the platform in full view of the other people who were using the train. He was in his prison stripes. He was also handcuffed, and people jeered and spat at him, and it was such a terrible thing to happen to him, having been such an important person in society, such a clever man, so well respected and feted and lionised in his own time, and here he is being spat at Clapham Junction train station. They've now put a plaque up for him, so posthumous understanding of that, and this is his prison, his cell, his actual prison in Wandsworth. So when he went to Reading Jail, he was treated as badly as he had been in Wandsworth, because it was still hard labour. But in Reading Jail, this guy comes in, Charles Thomas Woolridge, and he arrived to be hanged. And I just want to ponder on the word hanged here in terms of capital punishment. So people think sometimes that if somebody has been hanged, then you should use the word hung. But you shouldn't. You should always say that somebody has been hanged. And we had a very famous family of executioners called the Pierpoints, and one of the last of these was called Albert Pierpoint, and again there's a film about him if you're interested. And he was despite being an executioner, he was a really humane fellow. And what he was able to do was if you hang somebody, you want to break their neck, because that's the most humane and quickest death. But if you don't do that, then somebody is going to be strangled badly for minutes upon minutes upon minutes, and it's going to be a long and painful death. So Pierpoint worked out how to do a ratio of body weight to rope length to trapdoor, and he was able to hang people as humanely as possible. Now this guy, Charles Thomas Woolridge, he did end up being hanged, and the guy who hanged him was not Pierpoint, and apparently his neck was stretched as he fell through. So Wilde, after he'd left Reading Jail, was so opposed to capital punishment, he felt it was just not morally right, and so he wrote the Ballad of Reading Jail. And ballads have a really big tradition in British literature, because they essentially come from an oral tradition whereby you would want to get information from one hamlet or village to another hamlet or village, and so somebody would set some event to music, and you would have a rhyme scheme, because rhymes are always much easier to remember. And then a visiting minstrel would go round and they would sing the ballad, and the ballad would be repeated. And so we have a really strong tradition of those. They do have rhyme schemes, but the rhyme schemes vary, and they do have metre, but the metres also vary. And so Wilde's A Ballad of Reading Jail, which is a very, very long poem, is a 6-line stanzas, 8 syllables followed by 6 syllables, and it's kind of quite typical of a ballad. And so here, I've only got 3 stanzas, so don't get too concerned you're going to have a huge reading here. Here's the beginning, the opening stanza. So this guy has killed his wife, and that's why he's going to be hanged. And I have to say, I find some of this uncomfortable, because Wilde does make him a victim of the state, when actually perhaps his wife is the bigger victim. So, he did not wear his scarlet coat for blood and wine or red, and blood and wine were on his hands when they found him with the dead, the poor dead woman whom he loved and murdered in her bed. So this chap, after he had killed his wife, did try to say that he was very remorseful about it, and he did not seek clemency, and he did not want his execution to be overturned. And then this is an interesting stanza, it's the third stanza, and he walked amongst the trial men in a suit of shabby grey, a cricket cap was on his head, and his step seemed light and gay, but I never saw a man who looked so wistfully at the day. And I think this really encapsulates this idea of this man knowing that he's going to die, knowing the date that he's going to die, and yet he still has to go through the day and with his jaunty cricket cap and his light and gay step, but so wistful about the day because he knows that time is short. This to me is one of the most powerful of the stanzas, and it's because it really attacks the heart of the bastions of power. So when we think about the process of law and somebody being imprisoned, people don't want that person to commit suicide. They want that person to have the full weight of the law and to be dealt with in the way that the society has deemed they should be dealt with. So this is a stanza talking about the power of the legal situation and the power of the prison. He does not sit with silent men who watch him night and day, who watch him when he tries to weep and when he tries to pray, who watch him lest himself should rob the prison of its prey. And you can see this really clever wordplay there between pray and pray, and this idea that these prisoners are just encapsulated in a prison system and they are the prey. Anyway, Wilde was released from prison in 1897, and he sailed to Dieppe in France straight away, which was obviously what he should have done beforehand. And he remained in exile until his death in 1900, and so he was 46 when he died. And at that point, I would suggest that the world lost a brilliant man and a brilliant playwright and literary artist. He did reunite with Bosie in these few years, the 3 years as he was in exile, but the families were very angry, and they said that they would cut off all money if they stayed together. So essentially they split up. Wilde's friend Robbie Ross, who was a really good fellow, came and stayed with him for a bit, but ultimately Constance, his ex-wife, who wouldn't speak to him and wouldn't let him see the children, sent him money to keep him going, and he just had a very sad and lonely life, getting iller and iller, and then he died in 1900 of meningitis. There's a lot to do, supposedly, with his living conditions. And this is where he's buried, in this cemetery in France. Robbie Ross, who was this good friend of his and his literary executor, commissioned this stone, and this is now a pilgrimage for many people to go and have a look and to pay their respects to Wilde, and there he lies. 50 years after Wilde died, Robbie Ross's ashes were added to this tomb, and so the two of them are resting in peace together as ex-lovers. And that's that. So, any questions from anybody about Victorian stuff or Wilde or any shenanigans?
Sure.
Yep.
One of his best epigraphs was, "Work is the curse of the drinking class."
Yes, I would agree. Work probably is the curse of the drinking class, but at least it pays for it. Yep.
So obviously, if they're wearing green carnations, the police and other society will know what that means. So that's not damning in itself.
Well, it was a bit of an underground movement, and gay men have always had underground movements where they are able to oscillate around the structures that are put in place to keep them from doing what they want to do. So there are often some secret stuff that gay men know that other people don't. I've had conversations with gay men where they've said all sorts of stuff, and I was like, blimey, really? I didn't know that at all. Alrighty, well, thank you very much. It's nice to see so many of you out, and thanks very much for coming.